I started out as a lowly plebe over at MIT, where I'd been inside, and they made a meteorologist out of me. Sent me off as a second lieutenant. The ranks were so thin, the promotion was very rapid. So I went from the second lieutenant to first lieutenant to captain to major. I had a few decorations, so they all added to points, and you got home, you took your turn based upon the accumulation of points. And with 2.5 years over there, at my rank, a couple of decorations, the audit added up, so I got an early return home. I had an air medal because I did fly frequently with the crews in connection with my responsibility as a weather officer and forecaster, and interviews before they took off and when they came back. And so I had in several missions, and until the brigadier grounded all weather officers because we're in too short supply. That's why I got promoted rapidly. We didn't have any weather officers. Air medal. Yeah, I had a Bronze Star, and the Bronze Star was for, some sort of special services in connection with some of the missions and one thing or another. And then, all of a sudden, I was surprised when I got home, and I had a Croix de Guerre waiting for me. Why? I don't know. I guess it's because I never knocked over any Frenchmen on my bicycle. But, I had those 3 decorations. During the war, I was stationed in Earl's Colne, which is a little village north and east of London, just a little bit west of Norwich. We were there quite some period. At first, the B-26s were allowed to low-level bombing, and they weren't at all suitable for that. They just weren't fast enough. Another organization in our weather group, they sent out a dozen planes on a low level, and I never heard from any of them. So at that point, low level was out of the question, and they spent quite a bit of time in practicing at 12,000 feet, the medium level. And that was the height they used in all the missions. And most of the missions, of course, were first in France and then a little bit deeper, and then came the move to the south coast to get ready for the jump across to Cherbourg. And so most of my service was right in southeast England until we got over to Peninsula, over to Cherbourg. Then we were up through France and Germany and on to Frankfurt and back home. I did get a very interesting flight after we had all been grounded. Just a few days after D-Day, I never saw so many ships and so many planes. The world's greatest armada. It had to be. You look down below, and here's a flight going this way, up above, flight there, another flight up here. You look up overhead, the same thing as high as you can see. And the doggone channel was just alive with boats. You could walk across the channel on the boats. But it was a terrible landing because the weather wasn't good, and it was a very, very difficult climb for the men who were debarking there at Cherbourg, trying to get ashore before they get killed, and then trying to scramble up those cliffs. I don't know how any of them made it. That was a terrible moment in our history, because the losses were heavy until the troops finally started pushing inland with gliders and everything else, bringing the troops in. And from there it was a march on up through France, into Holland, out to Frankfurt, Germany, back home. We did a great deal of weather forecasting from our position in Cherbourg. The main station was still back in England. My poor lieutenant, he'd get on the phone, he would try to get messages, try to get something across, and he'd get yelling. I'd say, hey, why don't you use the telephone? He couldn't make them. Well, I never took over that duty. But my lieutenant was a good-natured guy. We weren't in the naval branch. We were land-based. So I guess we were officially the American Air Corps, the United States Air Force or whatever. I had graduated from Dartmouth. Jobs are kind of scarce around here. through another connection, counselor in a camp we used to attend. The principal of the Sarasota High School was one of his counselors. And he says, we need a math major down there in our school system. And we're well into the summer and we don't have anybody. And would you be interested? Well, I hadn't been to Florida before, and I said, yeah, sure. So headed on down to Florida that fall. Got settled down there in Sarasota. Enjoyed teaching down there. Had a nice group of kids. It was kind of a middle school area. It was from there, I was down there the second year when Pearl Harbor busted everything up. And so I immediately resigned and headed north to go to my own draft board in North Colony, New Hampshire. And they promptly told me to reply directly to Concord, to the Major General or Advocate. But I thought, my God, here I am, I'm not even in the service, and already I'm in problems. And he told me that I was to appear at MIT and register there, and that's when they told us we're going to be weathermen, meteorologists. And they really poured it to us for 10 months. It was classes and evening study groups and parades and all sorts of things. They got us all set to be Air Corps weather officers. And then from there, my next assignment was down in Louisiana with a navigation group. They were just breaking in too. And I was very short time with them as their weather forecaster, learning how to forecast weather coming out of the Gulf. And from there over to Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. And that's where the group was stationed and created. That was the 323rd Bomb Group. They were still in maneuvers and training and preparing there. I shouldn't release this, but it's far too late now, I'm sure. But their special enjoyment was coming in off the water up to that big hotel on the coast and put the B-26s right on the tail up over that hotel. God, they never once knocked over that top story. I don't know why they didn't. But they were a bunch of real jockeys. Lucky they were for what they was going to be going through shortly. But anyway, we got the word to head for England. I didn't fly over with them. Boy, they took all their room with baggage and equipment and everything else, so I was on a slow boat, but we settled in at Earl's Cold. And there the practice continued, and it wasn't too long before our group, the 323rd Bomb Group, was called into action by wing with a target. And that's when the preliminaries started, the crews are called in, the navigators are briefed. And as a weather officer, I was briefing on the weather. And incidentally, my quarters, well, I was always right in the control tower. I was right always on the weather and on hand. Then they'd get the course, and the navigator would lay it out. They would take off, and there might be a flight of a couple of dozen planes, and head into the target. And that was when the target was still very hot. And the B-26 was a tough plane. On many occasions it came back, shot up a bit, an engine missing. Well, I remember one tough mission, we were missing 5 planes. And about a half hour late, here comes all 5 of them coming in. If the starboard motor was out, then they would fly a counterclock, have that good engine driving the plane, and the starboard engine dead. A couple of them went around one way. When they got through, the other 3 who had lost their port engine, they went around the other way. So all 5 of them were safely back on the ground. You know, I'm really a very emotional guy, and so I do bust up, try to remember some of these things. But it was a very interesting experience. At the same time, it's kind of rough. But I know the other 3 groups, and our 323rd, the 387th, the 422nd, I've forgotten the numbers of the others, but we were all tied into the computer. For a while, our B-26s were on night practice, and they didn't like that at all. They were all the time trying to get out of it. They would always say, well, how come the 322nd isn't flying, or the 347, or why aren't they flying? And well, then we tied all the stations together, and I would dictate to the others my position on the condition for night flying. And I said, I think we ought to go, there's no problem. Next run would pick it up. They would carry on with their message. All 4 of us would be, we'd get together. So when the night flying practice mission was on, how about, I says, forget it. Yeah, they were all flying this night. I know for a fact, because I've talked with all the weather officers, and all of us are clear. So they grouchingly go up in the air and do their practice flights, and they didn't like that at all. And it wasn't too long before they were based at medium level, 12,000 feet. And so we didn't have to argue about who was going to go when. But there were some interesting experiences, of course. We had a great group of pilots, a great group of soldiers in my charge. They were all great. All in all, it was an interesting experience, except for the sad moments. I was on a inquiry board one time. Each person has to take his time serving on as a board member. Where is so-and-so? Doesn't he realize this is one of his very, very important duties? I had just come from a briefing. And I said, he didn't come back today. So it had sad moments. But I think the most interesting one was that trip a few days after D-Day, observing the ships below, all of the landing barges, dropping soldiers off board. My goodness, a lot of them drowned before they even get ashore. And then that flight and flight, squadron and squadron down below. I remember at the briefing, the officer said, the most important thing you're going to do is to maintain your altitude. Do not depart from your altitude. And I can see why. If they did, they'd be knocking some of our own planes down, either down one way or the other. So they flew to the assigned altitude and came back. But that was my most exciting experience, seeing that. Eyes just, you just couldn't, there's no way of seeing what it was like without being there. Being there in the control tower, right in the center of the field, and the buzz bombs were starting to fly then. I remember one came kind of low over the roof, and kaboom, she blew up just beyond us. And there were several times when the control officer and I would both hit that trench about the same time when they were coming. But for a while, it was bad, and London suffered something awful from those buzz bombs. It was terrible loss of life in London. And I did have I had some close friends at MIT. Three of us were together a lot at MIT, and then we didn't all get the same assignment. I ended up over in London. One of them ended up in Greenland, and another one is in South America someplace. We were wide apart. But we did get together a couple of times on leaves during the war. But those two are both, they're long since gone now. So I guess I'm the only one left of the trio. I don't know. I can't claim that it caused me any much loss of sleep, and I sleep well now, and I still, I think, very good health for a guy of my age. And I came through with no injuries of any kind from service. I guess I was happy to be back, and I had a very enjoyable time after I did get back, because that's when I went back into education again. Uncle Sam underwrote my tuition, my master's tuition at Harvard, and then when I taught in Reading, had a good experience there, Reading, Mass, on down to Stamford, Connecticut, as math and science teachers there. Then short distance from there in Darien, Connecticut, and there I became business manager and assistant superintendent of schools. We were there. In fact, we started a family down there while we were at Darien. From there, Westford hired me as superintendent. We've been here over 50 years. I don't know. I hear all sorts of loose news on the radio and every place else, and everybody has opinions about everything. But I think that the United States was very happy when the World War was over. As you know, kind of business, everything picked up a bit there for a while. Doesn't seem to be doing well right now, but I don't know. So I thoroughly enjoyed my work as superintendent here. We put together a wonderful staff of teachers. We built some low-priced buildings the town could afford, after turning down requests 2 or 3 times before we could get them underway. But since then, we've been building very acceptable schools in a very short order. I think everybody really felt that it was a horrible thing to drop that bomb. All the lives killed, all the people. Oh, it was just a terrible disaster for the Japanese. But at the same time, trying to invade Japan, there would have been a slaughter there too. There would have been terrible losses on both sides, both the Americans and the Japanese. So I think the general feeling was that dropping the bomb saved a lot of lives, and I'm sure it did, because it cost a lot of lives too. And there were a lot of close ones there too. Before the bomb was dropped, our planes were getting close into Japan, and boy, oh boy, they really had some running to do before they were shot down, and just because the Japanese were very, very much alive with their strong fleet. And look at the devastation they caused with the fleet at Pearl Harbor. Yeah, I guess I was 23 when I enlisted, 24 when I actually went into the service following MIT, 27 and a half by the time I was through, and back into teaching, making the loots of the schools before I arrived here in Westford in 1957 when I was 40 years old.